A homeless mother was offered a farm for $4, a place that had been sealed away from the world for 40 years. But what she discovered inside an old barn wasn't just a way out of poverty. It was a legacy that would redefine the meaning of wealth forever. If you've ever felt like you were at the absolute bottom, with nowhere left to turn, I need you to listen to this story. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button, because this is a place where we share stories about finding light in the deepest darkness. Your story matters here too. The room smelled of bleach and quiet desperation. It was a smell I had gotten used to over the last 2 years, the official scent of rock bottom. It clung to the thin mattress, the gray metal bunk bed, the single plastic chair where I folded the few clothes my son, Leo, and I owned. Each item was a relic of a life before this, a life where we had a home, however fragile. Now, our world was contained in 2 duffel bags on the floor of a family shelter, a space that was technically a roof over our heads, but never, ever a home. Leo was 3, and for more than half his life, home had been a series of temporary rooms just like this one. He sat on the floor, humming to himself as he lined up 3 small, mismatched toy cars. He didn't know the difference. To him, this was just life. That was the thought that broke my heart 100 times a day. Maya? A soft knock at the door. It was Sarah, one of the case managers. Her voice was always gentle, but today it had an edge I couldn't place, a kind of nervous energy. Mr. Harrison is here to see you, in the counseling office. My stomach tightened. Mr. Harrison was my legal aid lawyer, a man who seemed permanently exhausted, buried under a mountain of paperwork representing people like me, people who had fallen through every crack. I only saw him when something was wrong, or when something was about to go wrong. Had our shelter time run out? Was there a problem with my food stamp application? My mind raced through a Rolodex of potential disasters. I knelt down and smoothed Leo's hair. Hey, buddy. Mommy has to go talk to someone. You stay here with Sarah for a little bit, okay? He just nodded, his attention already back on his cars. He was good at this. Too good. He'd had too much practice at being left in rooms with kind-faced strangers. I followed Sarah down the long, sterile hallway. The linoleum floors squeaked under my worn-out sneakers. Every surface in the shelter was designed to be wiped down, to be impersonal, to prevent anyone from leaving too much of themselves behind. It was a place for transients, and it never let you forget it. Mr. Harrison was sitting in the small, windowless office, his briefcase open on the table in front of him. He looked even more tired than usual, but he managed a small, weary smile when I walked in. Maya, please, sit down. I sat, my hands clenched in my lap. Is everything okay, Mr. Harrison? He took a deep breath, the kind of breath a doctor takes before delivering complicated news. It's unusual, he started, shuffling a stack of papers. I've been a legal aid attorney for 22 years, and I've never had a case file like this land on my desk. He pushed a single, slightly yellowed sheet of paper across the table toward me. It was a copy of a legal document, filled with dense, archaic language. Do you know the name Elara Vance? He asked. I shook my head. The name meant nothing to me. Should I? She was your great-aunt, your maternal grandmother's sister. He paused, letting that sink in. I had no memory of my grandmother, let alone her sister. My mom had passed away when I was 16, and she had never spoken of extended family. We were always on our own. Elara Vance passed away 6 weeks ago, he continued. She had no children, no living siblings. She lived reclusively, very reclusively. According to the county records, she hadn't been seen in town for nearly 40 years. A ghost. A name from a family tree I didn't even know I had. Okay, I said slowly, unsure of where this was going. I'm sorry she passed, but I don't see what that has to do with me. Mr. Harrison leaned forward, his tired eyes holding mine. It has everything to do with you, Maya. Elara left a will. A very strange, very specific will. She named you as her sole heir. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. Heir? To what? A box of old photographs? A dusty apartment? She left you her property, he said, tapping the paper. A farm. 60 acres, a house, and a barn, about 2 hours north of here, in a place called Whisper Creek. The words didn't compute. A farm. 60 acres. It sounded like something from a movie, not something that could happen to a 21-year-old woman packing her life into a duffel bag in a homeless shelter. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. I don't understand, I whispered. Neither did I, at first, he admitted. Here's the complicated part. Your great-aunt was a tax protester. She believed the local government was corrupt and refused to pay property taxes for decades. As of her death, the property has an outstanding tax lien of $54,700. There it was. The catch. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. $54,000. He might as well have said $1 billion. It was a completely impossible number. So it's not mine, I said, the flicker of hope dying as quickly as it had appeared. The county owns it. Not yet, he said, holding up a hand. And this is the part I've never seen before. Elara structured her will through a very old, very obscure state trust law. The property was placed in a kind of legal stasis, sealed upon her death. The will stipulates that her named heir, you, has the right to claim the deed directly from the trust for a symbolic fee before it reverts to the county's jurisdiction. The fee she set was $1 for every decade the property was to be left to rest, as she put it. She died almost exactly 40 years after she last paid her taxes. He slid a small, pre-printed form across the table. You can claim the deed for $4. $4. I had $6 and change in my pocket. I could afford the farm, but I couldn't afford to keep it. It was a cruel joke. A phantom inheritance. But the taxes, I said, my voice flat. I still have to pay the $54,000, right? Yes, he confirmed. Once you claim the deed, the clock starts. You have 90 days to satisfy the lien with the county. If you don't, they will seize the property and auction it off to the highest bidder. He sighed and leaned back. And there is already a bidder. A developer, Pioneer Valley Developments, has been trying to acquire that land for years. They've already filed a preliminary offer with the county. They're offering to pay the full tax lien and give you $10,000, clear and simple, for you to sign over the deed to them the moment you claim it. $10,000. The number hung in the air, shimmering with possibility. $10,000 would be a life raft. It would mean a security deposit on an apartment, a used car, food in the fridge. It would mean getting Leo out of the shelter. It would mean a real, tangible new start. It was the sensible choice. The only choice. I should take the money, I said, more to myself than to him. Mr. Harrison nodded slowly. It's the logical move, Maya. It's a clean break. Guaranteed money in your pocket. This farm. From the county agent's report, it's been completely neglected for 40 years. The house is probably uninhabitable. The land is overgrown. It's a money pit, not a home. He was right. It was a ruin, a liability. But a strange, stubborn thought took root in my mind. A 60-acre farm, my own land. My great-aunt, this ghost of a woman, had gone to extraordinary lengths to pass it to me, specifically. Not to sell it, not to let the county have it, but to give me the first chance. Why? What was in Whisper Creek? Why did she hide herself away for 40 years? The thought of signing it away, sight unseen, to a faceless developer felt wrong. It felt like a betrayal of a woman I'd never met. Before I decide, I heard myself say, the words surprising me as much as they did him. I have to see it. I have to go there. Mr. Harrison looked at me, a flicker of something, respect, maybe, in his tired eyes. The bus ticket will cost you close to $100 round trip. And it's a risk. You'd be spending money you don't have to look at a property you'll almost certainly have to sell. I know, I said, my voice gaining a sliver of conviction. But it's mine. For $4, it's mine. I have to stand on it. Just once. The bus groaned its way out of the city's concrete heart, leaving the gray skyline behind like a bad memory. Leo was pressed against the window, his breath fogging the glass, mesmerized by the blur of passing buildings. For him, it was an adventure. For me, it felt like leaping off a cliff with no idea what was below. I'd spent nearly all of my meager savings on 2 one-way tickets. There was no round trip. I'd told myself it was a practical decision. If I took the developer's offer, I could afford a ticket back. If I didn't, well, I hadn't let myself think that far ahead. It was an act of faith, and I wasn't a person who had much of that left. The landscape began to change, slowly at first, then all at once. The endless sprawl of suburbs gave way to patches of forest, then to wide open fields lying dormant under a pale winter sky. The houses grew farther apart, their mailboxes standing like lonely sentinels at the ends of long gravel driveways. The air inside the bus was stale, a mix of diesel fumes and the faint scent of someone's fast food lunch. But every time the doors hissed open in a small town, a gust of clean, cold air would rush in, smelling of damp earth and pine. It smelled like freedom. We were the only ones who stayed on for the final leg of the journey. The bus driver, a burly man with a kind, weathered face, glanced at me in his rearview mirror. "Whisper Creek, you said?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Not many folks head out that way anymore, not unless they have to." "We have to," I said simply. He nodded, as if that made perfect sense. The town of Whisper Creek wasn't so much a town as a crossroads with a few buildings clinging to it, a gas station with a pay inside sign, a boarded-up general store, and a small post office. The bus pulled to a stop in a gravel lot, and the driver helped me with my duffel bags. "The Vance place is a good 5 miles out," he said, pointing down a narrow, cracked asphalt road that disappeared into a thick stand of trees. "You got a ride?" My heart sank. I hadn't thought about that. I was going to call a taxi. He gave a dry chuckle. "Ain't been a taxi service here in 20 years. But Walt's usually hanging around the gas station. He'll take you, for a price." Walt was a man who looked as old as the hills, sitting in a rusty pickup truck that might have been new when my great-aunt was still speaking to people. He agreed to drive us for $20, a significant portion of my remaining cash. Leo was excited to ride in the big truck, oblivious to the transaction that felt like another small piece of my future being chipped away. "So, you're kin to Alara Vance," Walt said as the truck rattled down the road, his voice raspy. He didn't ask it as a question. In a town this small, news probably traveled faster than his truck did. "Her great-niece," I confirmed. He grunted. "She was a strange one, Alara. Smart as a whip. Came back from university with all sorts of ideas about plants and soil. Then one day, she just shut the gate, put up no trespassing signs, chained it all up. That was a long, long time ago. My daddy said some big company tried to swindle her, and she never trusted anyone again." He glanced at me. "Heard you've got a developer sniffing around already. Same company, different name. Some things never change." The pavement ended, and the road turned to dirt and gravel, the truck bucking over ruts and potholes. The woods grew thicker, the trees taller, their branches interlocking overhead to form a dark tunnel. It felt like we were driving back in time. Finally, Walt slowed the truck and pointed. "There it is." Through a break in the trees, I saw it. A heavy, rusted iron gate, choked with vines, and secured with a thick, formidable chain and a padlock that looked like a chunk of solid iron. Behind it, a long, overgrown driveway disappeared into a riot of wild vegetation. All I could see of the house was a section of sagging roofline above the trees. It didn't look abandoned. It looked feral, like the wilderness had swallowed it whole. Walt pulled over and helped me with the bags. He looked from the gate to me to Leo, who was now clinging to my leg, intimidated by the deep silence of the woods. "Will said in the will where the key was?" Walt asked. I nodded, clutching the strap of my bag where Mr. Harrison's notes were tucked away. "It's supposed to be in a lockbox near the gatepost." He squinted at the overgrown fence line. "Well, good luck finding it." He paused, a moment of unexpected kindness in his gruff demeanor. "Look, miss, if you get in there and it's too much, you walk back to the gas station. I'll be around. I'll drive you back to the bus stop, no charge." I was too choked up to answer, so I just nodded my thanks. He got back in his truck, gave a short wave, and rumbled away, leaving us in a profound and unnerving silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind in the pines. We were alone, standing before a gate that hadn't been opened in my lifetime. The lockbox was exactly where the will said it would be, hidden inside a hollowed-out cavity in the stone gatepost, concealed by a loose rock. My fingers trembled as I worked the combination, my mother's birthday. A small, painful detail that felt like a message across time. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key. It was for the front door of the house. The massive padlock on the gate, however, had no key. Alara's instructions were simple and eccentric. "The gate is a promise. It is not to be unlocked. Go around. Go around." I looked at the dense, thorny thicket that lined the fence. It seemed impossible. But after a few minutes of searching, I found what she must have meant. A narrow deer trail, almost invisible, that wound its way into the woods and ran parallel to the fence line. It was a test, the first of many, I suspected. Hauling our bags, with Leo holding tight to my hand, we pushed our way through the overgrown path. Branches snagged at my clothes and hair. The air was cold and damp, smelling of leaf mold and rich, dark earth. It took us nearly 20 minutes to bypass the long driveway and emerge into a clearing. And there it was, the house. It was a simple two-story farmhouse, its white paint peeled and grayed by decades of sun and rain. The porch sagged, and shutters hung askew from the windows like broken teeth. But it was still standing, solid. It was rooted in the earth in a way that felt ancient and permanent. To its right, farther back, stood the barn. It was huge, far larger than the house. Its red paint faded to a soft, dusky rose color. Its great doors were shut tight, and I could see the dark lines of chains wrapped around them. The iron key scraped in the lock of the front door, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. With a groan of protest, the heavy wooden door swung inward, opening into darkness. The air that rolled out was stale and cold, the scent of dust and time itself. I held Leo's hand tighter. "It's okay, baby. We're okay." I stepped across the threshold, and it was like stepping into a photograph. Everything was covered in a thick, uniform blanket of dust, but it was all perfectly preserved. A sofa and armchair draped in white sheets stood like ghostly figures in the living room. A tall grandfather clock stood silent against the far wall. In the kitchen, a cup and saucer sat on the table, as if waiting for a tea that was never poured. It was profoundly creepy, yet strangely peaceful. This wasn't a place of violence or chaos. It was a place of waiting. On the center of the dusty kitchen table was a single, sealed envelope. My name was written on it in a spidery, elegant script. My hands shook as I tore it open. The note inside was brief, the same handwriting as the name on the envelope. "My dear Maya, if you are reading this, you chose to come. Good. The logical choice is rarely the right one. Your journey is not over, it has just begun. The house is a shell, the land is the heart, but the soul is in the barn. Everything you need to understand is in there. The key to its lock is where all good things are planted, in the earth, under the giver of life. Your aunt, Ilara. Under the giver of life. I looked around the dim, dusty kitchen. The phrase was poetic, cryptic. What was the giver of life? The sun? I walked back outside, scanning the overgrown yard. My eyes fell on a massive, ancient oak tree that stood alone in what must have once been the front lawn. Its branches, bare for the winter, reached toward the sky like gnarled arms. It was the largest, oldest living thing in sight, the giver of life. It had to be. Leo had found a patch of moss and was happily poking it with a stick. I left him there, where I could see him from the base of the tree. The ground around the trunk was a thick mat of fallen leaves and tangled roots. I got on my hands and knees, my fingers digging into the cold, damp soil. I clawed away leaves, dirt, and worms, searching for anything that felt like a key. Nothing. I moved around the trunk, my desperation growing. This was insane. A wild goose chase designed by a crazy old woman. Maybe Mr. Harrison was right. Maybe I should have just taken the money. Then my fingers brushed against something hard and flat. A stone. It was a small, smooth river stone, different from the rocky soil around it. It wasn't buried deep. As I pulled it up, I saw it had a simple, elegant sunburst pattern carved into its surface. It was the lid. Beneath it was a small, hollowed-out space, and nestled inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was another heavy, ornate iron key. The key to the barn. The chains on the barn doors were thick and black with rust. They were wrapped through the handles and secured by a padlock that looked even more formidable up close than the one on the front gate. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying metallic click. It took all my body weight, straining against the rust and the years, to turn it. The lock sprang open with a loud crack. Unwinding the heavy chains felt like unburdening the property of its past. They fell to the ground with a clang that echoed in the quiet air. I put my shoulder to the massive door and pushed. It resisted, groaning as the wood scraped against the weathered floor. Inch by inch, a vertical slice of darkness appeared. I pushed harder, and the door swung open, revealing the cavernous interior. The air that poured out was different from the house. It was thick with the smell of dry hay, old wood, and something else. A faint, spicy floral scent, like a garden long since gone to seed. Dust motes danced like tiny stars in the shafts of light slanting down from high, grimy windows. The barn was enormous, far bigger than I'd imagined. The main floor was a vast, open space, filled with shadows and strange shapes. Old, canvas-draped farm equipment stood like sleeping beasts. Racks of dusty glass jars lined one wall. But my eyes were drawn to the center of the room. There, sitting alone as if on a stage, was a heavy, sea-worn wooden chest bound with iron straps. It wasn't locked. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt before it. This had to be it. The reason for all the secrecy. Money? Gold? I lifted the heavy lid. A wave of disappointment washed over me. It was filled with books, dozens of them. They were leather-bound journals, their pages filled with the same elegant, spidery script as the note. Beneath the journals was a small velvet bag. I opened it. Inside were not jewels, but seeds. Hundreds of tiny, strange-looking seeds of all shapes and sizes, each in a small, labeled glassine envelope. This was it? The great secret? Old diaries and some garden seeds? The bitterness returned. The developer's $10,000 felt like a fortune I had foolishly thrown away for a box of junk. Defeated, I sat on the dusty floor and pulled out the top journal. The date on the first page was almost 40 years ago. I opened it and began to read. To whoever finds this, though I pray it is the girl, my sister's granddaughter. My name is Ilara Vance. I am a botanist. Or I was. Now I am a ghost, a guardian of this land. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and the world has found its way back to my door. I fear what it will want. I did not choose this isolation. It was forced upon me. 40 years ago, I was a promising researcher at a prestigious university. My field was genetic hybridization in plants. I still believe, that the future of our planet lies in our ability to work with nature, to help it adapt, to unlock the potential hidden within its DNA. I was not creating monsters, I was creating survivors. Plants that could thrive in drought, that could resist blight, that could produce more with less. Plants that could heal. My breakthrough was a species of Helianthus, the common sunflower. Through years of patient crossbreeding, I created a variant, which I named Helios 7. Its seeds produced an oil that was lighter, purer, and far more energy-dense than any known biofuel. It was clean, efficient, and could be grown almost anywhere. It could have changed the world. It could have freed us from our reliance on fossil fuels. I was naive. I shared my research with a corporate partner, a petrochemical company that had funded a small part of my grant. Their name was Pioneer Petrochemicals. They saw my discovery not as a gift to the world, but as a threat to their empire. They tried to steal it. They falsified documents, claimed my research as their intellectual property, and tried to patent it out from under me. When I fought back, they tried to ruin me. They discredited my work, threatened my colleagues, and buried me in legal challenges I could not afford to fight. I saw what was coming. They didn't just want my work, they wanted to bury it forever. So I ran. I took my seed stock, my research, and I came back here, to the only place I had left. My family farm. I locked the gate, cut the phone lines, and disappeared. I let the world think I was a crazy, bitter old woman. It was the only way to protect my life's work. Pioneer Petrochemicals eventually became Pioneer Valley Developments. They stopped looking for a botanist and started looking for land. My land. They have been circling like vultures for decades, waiting for me to die. I had to stop reading. My hands were trembling. Pioneer Valley Developments. The same company. Walt, the taxi driver, was right. It was the same fight, passed down a generation. I looked at the velvet bag of seeds, then back at the journal. This wasn't just a box of junk. This was a legacy. A dangerous, world-changing legacy. I spent the rest of the day and deep into the night devouring the journals, one after another, huddled in the cold barn with a flashlight. Leo slept soundly in the house, curled up in a nest of sheets on the dusty sofa. The world outside the barn faded away, and I was drawn into Ilara's life. Her voice, clear and precise, rose from the pages. She wasn't a crazy old woman. She was a brilliant, wounded scientist. After documenting the theft of her Helios 7 sunflower, she went on to describe her work over the next 40 years of isolation. She hadn't stopped. In fact, her seclusion had become her laboratory. The 60 acres of the farm were her testing ground. She wrote about a strain of willow, Salix luna, whose bark contained a compound that was showing incredible results in her own tests as a non-addictive pain reliever, far more potent than aspirin. She documented a type of moss that could filter heavy metals from water with astonishing efficiency. She had created a type of luminescent fungus that could glow brightly enough to read by, a living light source. It was like something out of science fiction, but it was real. She had the data, decades of it. Meticulous, cross-referenced, peer-review-ready data, all handwritten in these journals. In the final journal, written only a few months before she died, her tone changed. It became more personal, her handwriting a little less steady. I am growing tired. My body is failing me, even as my mind still races. I have protected this work for a lifetime, but protection is not its purpose. It was meant to be shared. The world is sicker than it was when I first hid from it. The climate is more fragile. The need is greater. And now there is you, Maya. I have followed your life from a distance, through quiet inquiries made by the only lawyer I ever trusted, Mr. Harrison's father, as it happens. I know of your struggles. I know of your resilience. I see my sister's strength in what I hear of you. I have left you with a terrible burden and a magnificent choice. The developer will come for this land. They will offer you money. It will be tempting. It will feel like a lifeline. You can take it. You can take their money, and you will have a new start. There is no shame in that. You and your boy deserve safety and peace. If you choose this path, you must burn these journals. Burn the seeds. Let this all turn to ash. Do not let my work fall into their hands. That is my only condition. Or, you can choose the harder path. You can stay. You can fight. You can take up this work where I left off. In this barn, you will find everything you need, the research, the data, and the seed stock for every species I have developed. They are my children, and I am leaving them in your care. The choice, my dear girl, is yours. The easy lie of a comfortable life, or the hard truth of a meaningful one. I pray you have the strength to choose wisely. I closed the journal, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I walked out of the barn and into the cold, clear night. The sky was awash with stars, more than I had ever seen in the city, a brilliant, indifferent canopy. I looked at the dark, silent house where my son was sleeping. $10,000. It was no longer a lifeline. It was a temptation. A bribe to make me forget what was in these books. The sheer scale of it was crushing. I was a 21-year-old high school dropout who had been flipping burgers before I had Leo. What did I know about botany, about patent law, about fighting a multi-million-dollar corporation? Ilara was a genius. I was just me. A failure, a homeless mother who couldn't even provide a stable home for her child. I sank to the ground, the cold, damp earth seeping into my jeans, and I cried. I cried for my great-aunt Ilara, for her stolen life and her lonely genius. I cried for my mother, who I missed with a physical ache. I cried for Leo, for the instability I had dragged him through. And finally, I cried for myself, for the terrified, overwhelmed girl who was being asked to carry a legacy she couldn't possibly handle. How could she ask this of me? How could she leave me with an impossible choice? Have you ever been faced with a choice like that? One where the safe path is right there, clear and easy, but something in your gut, something deep in your soul, is pulling you toward the terrifying, uncertain, and rocky road. If you've been there, I know you understand the storm that was raging inside me. And if you're finding value in this story, maybe take a moment to hit that like button. It tells me that these stories of hard choices and hidden strengths are connecting with you. It means a lot. Now back to that cold night on the farm. As I sat there, exhausted and empty, a light flickered on in the house. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. An intruder? But then I saw Leo's small silhouette in the window. He'd woken up. I ran inside, my own fear forgotten. He was standing in the middle of the living room, his blanket clutched in his hand, looking small and lost in the vast, dark space. "Mommy?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "It's dark." I scooped him up, holding him tight against my chest. "I know, baby. I'm here. It's okay." I carried him to the window and pointed up. "Look, Leo. Look at all the stars." His crying subsided as he stared, mesmerized. "So many," he whispered in awe. In the city, you could count the stars you could see on one hand. Here, the sky was a diamond field. We stood there for a long time, just looking at the sky. His small, warm body a comfort against mine. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I looked around the dusty, decrepit room. This wasn't a ruin. It was a foundation. I looked out at the dark shape of the barn. It wasn't a tomb of forgotten dreams. It was an ark, filled with the seeds of a new world. And my great-aunt Ilara hadn't left me a burden. She had left me a map. She had left me a purpose. She had trusted me. She, a brilliant scientist, had looked at my broken life and seen not a failure, but a fighter. Strength, resilience. The $10,000 from the developer wasn't a lifeline anymore. It was an insult. It was the price of my silence, the price of my soul. It was the price of Leo's future, and I decided, right then and there, that it wasn't for sale. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. It was Mr. Harrison. His voice was strained. "Maya, I just got off the phone with the lawyer for Pioneer Valley. They know you're at the property. They're getting nervous. They've upped their offer." He paused. $25,000. But it's their final offer, and it expires tomorrow at noon. They want an answer. $25,000. A week ago, that number would have been my salvation. It would have been a miracle. Now, it felt like a pittance. It felt like a trap. I looked out the kitchen window at the massive oak tree, its branches stark against the morning sky. I thought of Ilara's words. The logical choice is rarely the right one. "Maya, are you there?" Mr. Harrison's voice was filled with concern. "This is a life-changing amount of money. You should seriously consider it. It's the smart play." I took a deep breath, the cold, clean air filling my lungs. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of clarity, a solid ground beneath my feet. It wasn't the ground of the farm. It was the ground of my own conviction. "No," I said, my voice steady and clear. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "No?" he finally repeated, as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "Maya, are you sure? This is a huge risk, the tax deadline." "I'm sure," I interrupted, my voice stronger now. "Tell them no. Tell them the land isn't for sale. Not for 25,000, not for 1,000,000. It's not for sale." "But the taxes, Maya. How are you going to pay $54,000 in less than 90 days? You have nothing." "I don't have nothing," I said, looking at the stack of leather-bound journals on the table. "I have my great-aunt's life's work, and I think it's worth a lot more than the back taxes." I explained everything, the journals, the seeds, the story of Helios 7 and Pioneer Petrochemicals. I told him about the willow bark and the moss and the glowing fungus. To his credit, Mr. Harrison listened without interruption. When I was finished, the line was quiet for a long time. I could hear him breathing, thinking. I expected him to tell me I was crazy, that I was chasing a fantasy, that I should take the money and run. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low and thoughtful. "Okay, Maya, this is a long shot, a very long shot. But if even a fraction of what you're saying is true, if those patents are documented," he trailed off. "Don't touch anything else. Don't move the journals. Don't touch the seeds. I'm going to make some calls. I know a professor at the State University in the Agricultural Sciences Department. And I know a patent lawyer who owes me a very big favor. Don't lose hope. Just hold on." He hung up, and I was left with the buzzing silence of the phone. My decision was made. The no had been spoken. The bridge to the easy life had been burned. Now there was only the hard path forward. The terror of what I had just done washed over me, cold and sharp. I had just turned down a fortune for a box of old books and a bag of seeds. I was either the bravest person I knew, or the biggest fool. With Mr. Harrison's words echoing in my mind, a new kind of energy surged through me. Hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, but it was there. I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to act. Ilara's last journal had mentioned one more thing, a final gift. If you choose to stay, you will need seed money. Look under the place where the grain was measured. The phrase was another one of her riddles. I went back to the barn. The place where grain was measured. I scanned the vast space. An old thresher? A sorting table? Then I saw it, in a dusty corner, a grain scale, a beautiful old apparatus of cast iron and brass. It was bolted to the floor. I ran my hands over it, under the weighing platform, around its base. Nothing. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against a section of the wooden floor beneath it that felt different. It was a single floorboard, slightly raised, its edges smoother than the others. My heart quickened. I found a rusty crowbar in a pile of old tools and wedged it into the seam. The board resisted, then gave way with a splintering groan. Beneath it was a hollow space, and inside that space was a small, tin lockbox. It was heavy. This had to be it. The real treasure, the gold. I pried open the rusted lid. Inside, there was no gold. There were stacks of cash, neatly bundled with rubber bands that had grown brittle with age. I counted it, my hands shaking. It was $5,000. And beneath the cash was another envelope. Inside were the official, stamped patent filing documents for Helios 7, Salix Luna, and a dozen other plants, all dated from 40 years ago. They were copies, but they were legal proof. Ilara hadn't just run. She had filed the patents before she disappeared, creating a legal firewall around her work. $5,000. It wasn't enough to pay the taxes, not even close. But it was more money than I had ever had in my life. It was a buffer. It was food. It was propane for the old heater in the house. It was, as Ilara had called it, seed money. It was enough to hold on. The next few weeks were the hardest and the most rewarding of my life. The first priority was making the house livable. I scrubbed 40 years of dust and grime from the floors and walls. I patched the leaky roof with tar I bought in town. I got the old water pump in the yard working again, drawing up cold, clear water from deep in the earth. Leo, my little city boy, transformed. He spent his days exploring the woods, collecting rocks and chasing squirrels. The haunted, anxious look in his eyes was replaced by a healthy, rosy-cheeked curiosity. He was happy. For the first time, he was truly, deeply happy. Every night, after he was asleep, I would go to the barn with my flashlight and study. I read Ilara's journals not as a story, but as a textbook. I learned the language of botany, of cross-pollination, of genetic markers. I started to understand the genius of her work. She had created a closed-loop ecosystem on the farm. The willows provided medicine. The sunflowers provided fuel for an old generator she had modified. The moss cleaned her water. It was a self-sustaining world. I took a small handful of the Helios 7 seeds and, following her precise instructions, planted them in a small, tilled patch of earth behind the house. It felt like a sacred act, planting these seeds of the past in the soil of my future. A month after my decision, Mr. Harrison called. His voice was electric. "Maya, you were right. You were absolutely right. I sent copies of the patent filings and excerpts from the journals to my contacts. They were skeptical, to say the least. But the data, they said the data is undeniable. The university's agricultural department wants to fund a full analysis of the seeds. And I got a call from a green energy startup in California. They want to talk about licensing the rights to Helios 7. Maya, these patents aren't just valid, they're revolutionary. Potentially worth millions. Many millions." I sat down hard on the porch steps, the phone pressed to my ear. Millions. The number was so large it was meaningless. It didn't feel real. "But the taxes," I whispered. "We still have the lien." "We're working on it," he said, his voice brimming with a newfound confidence. "The startup is willing to advance us the money to clear the lien as a show of good faith. But there's a new problem. Pioneer Valley Developments. They got wind of this. They filed a lawsuit. They're challenging the validity of Ilara's will, claiming she was mentally incompetent. They're trying to force the property into a public auction so they can snatch it up. The fight Ilara had warned me about was here. It was my fight now. But this time, I wasn't alone. "What do we do?" I asked. "We fight back, Mr. Harrison said, his voice like steel. "I'm no corporate lawyer, but my patent attorney friend is one of the best, and the university is offering its legal resources. They want to protect this research as much as we do. This isn't just your farm anymore, Maya. It's become a battleground for the future of agricultural science." The year that followed was a blur of legal battles and hard, physical work. While lawyers fought in courtrooms hundreds of miles away, I fought my own battles on the farm. I cleared land. I repaired fences. I started a small test garden, carefully cultivating the species from Ilara's seed bank. The small patch of Helios 7 sunflowers grew tall and strong, their faces turning to follow the sun like a crowd of devoted worshippers. The community in Whisper Creek, initially wary of the stranger who had inherited the haunted Vance place, started to come around. Walt would drop by with his truck, sometimes bringing a bag of groceries, other times just to see how the sunflowers were growing. The woman who ran the post office gave Leo a bag of cookies every time I went in to pick up the mail, which was now filled with letters from lawyers and scientists instead of government notices. They saw me not as an outsider, but as one of them, someone fighting to keep a piece of their valley out of the hands of a faceless corporation. The lawsuit was brutal. Pioneer Valley's lawyers painted Ilara as a paranoid lunatic. They used her isolation as proof of her instability. But we had her journals. Mr. Harrison had them authenticated, and I read passages from them in my deposition. I told the story of a brilliant woman who was betrayed and chose to protect her life's work in the only way she knew how. I wasn't just defending a will, I was defending her memory. The turning point came when a retired professor from Ilara's old university, a man in his 90s, came forward. He had been a junior colleague of hers. He testified that he had witnessed the corporate espionage from Pioneer Petrochemicals firsthand. He had been threatened into silence 40 years ago and had lived with the guilt ever since. His testimony corroborated every word in Ilara's journals. The judge threw out the lawsuit. The will was declared valid. The farm was mine. Indisputably, irrevocably mine. The day the news came, I didn't celebrate. I walked out to the barn, to the chest that held her journals, and I laid my hand on the worn leather cover of the first one. "We did it, Aunt Ilara," I whispered into the quiet, dusty air. "We won." It's been 2 years since that day. The farm is no longer the sleeping, overgrown place I first found. It's alive. The house has been restored, the porch no longer sags, and the windows are filled with light. The barn is now a state-of-the-art laboratory and seed bank, the Ilara Vance Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, funded by a partnership between the university and the clean energy startup that licensed Helios 7. I'm not a billionaire living in a mansion. That was never the point. The licensing deal for the biofuel sunflower provided more than enough money to secure our future, but I insisted that the bulk of the profits be funneled back into the institute, funding new research and making our discoveries open source, available to farmers and scientists around the world. I didn't want to repeat the mistakes of the past. Ilara's work was meant to be a gift to the world, and I was going to make sure it was. I spend my days working alongside botanists and students, continuing the work Ilara started. I'm not just the owner of the farm, I'm its custodian, its chief storyteller. I found I have a knack for it, for translating Ilara's dense scientific prose into stories people can understand. Leo is 5 now. He goes to the small elementary school in town. His favorite place in the world is the greenhouse, where he helps me water the seedlings. He is growing up surrounded by life, by purpose, by a community that loves him. He has roots. Sometimes, in the evening, I stand on the front porch and look out over the fields. I see the rows of sunflowers, their heads bowed for the night. I see the lights of the lab glowing in the barn. I think about the smell of bleach in the shelter, the feeling of hopelessness that was once my constant companion. It feels like another lifetime, like a story that happened to someone else. My great-aunt Ilara left me more than a farm. She left me more than a fortune. Wealth isn't about the number in your bank account. I learned that in the dust and silence of her home. True wealth is purpose. It's connection. It's the richness of the soil under your feet and the belief that you are part of something larger than yourself. It's the knowledge that you have a place in the world, a place to call home. She didn't just give me a second chance, she gave me a legacy to build upon, a meaningful life to live. She made me rich in the only way that truly matters. This story, my story, is about inheritance. Not the inheritance of money or property, but the inheritance of strength, of purpose, of a story that needed a new teller. We all have legacies left for us, hidden in the stories of our families, in the places we come from, in the struggles our ancestors endured. Sometimes you just have to be brave enough to turn down the easy money, push open the old barn door, and start reading. So I want to ask you, what has this story stirred in you? What secret legacies might be waiting in your own past? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one because this channel is a community built on the belief that our stories connect us and make us stronger. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and join us, because everyone deserves to find their own 60 acres of hope. Everyone deserves a place to plant their seed.